All right, again, welcome. And audience members, we'd love to see you on camera if you're comfortable with that. If it's really that time of day and you don't feel like being on camera, we're not going to penalize you, but we'd love to just have you as part of the conversation. Alrighty, so let's just take a couple more minutes as people are filtering in. Righty, so oh, Josh, I think you're going to know somebody coming on in. You might recognize some faces. Great. Again, I'm going to just monitor a little bit some the folks that might be entering the room. But thank you again for attending tonight's panel. We are the Center for the Business of Health. And as you know, many of you have attended a number of our panels in the past, but these are our Career Network vertical panels. Career Networks is a platform that the CBOH hosts, and we have 3 pillars, one of which is called Explore. And in Explore, we have our virtual panels, and also we have our fireside chats. So this is one of those, and as you know, our 7 verticals, this is supporting our payer space. So we have some wonderful guests here tonight to engage all of us in learning a little bit more about payers and about some of the different elements of different roles within that space, as well as some of the broader questions that you may have. Again, the format will be for you all to go ahead and feel free to ask any burning questions along the way, but we will stop every couple of moderator questions and ask our audience if you have any contributions or questions at that time. So at this moment, I am going to allow our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. And just because of the way my little Brady Bunch squares are, I'm going to allow Josh Zeitlin to go ahead and begin.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm Josh Zeitlin. I am a strategy advancement lead at Humana on the care management strategy team. Graduated with a dual public health and MBA degree from UNC in 2021. So decently new to Humana, all things considered. And by strategy advancement lead, what does that mean? I kind of work with partners across operations, analytics, kind of multidisciplinary healthcare teams, other Humana teams, et cetera, to scope, size, and prioritize opportunities to improve value for Humana members and associates. So think initiatives to kind of reduce healthcare costs or increase efficiency and what have you. So really excited to be here.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And I'm going to hand it over to Diane.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Hi, I am Diana Baer. I work at Elevance Health, which is the parent company for the Blue Cross Blue Shield payer in 14 states. Not everyone recognizes the parent company name. We changed our name recently. So my background, I graduated from Duke for undergrad with a biology degree and then went into management consulting. Was there for many years before transitioning into industry and working at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. And that's where I decided to go back and get my executive MBA. And I got that in 2020 from Keenan Flagler. So, which was a great way to kind of move up in my career. Ended up moving over to where I am now, Elevance Health, which is a larger company, has many more subsidiaries, many more markets that we're in. And my role now is the staff VP of strategy and planning for our commercial business. So basically it's the chief of staff role, reporting directly to the president of our commercial business. And I do everything from run our annual strategic planning process to managing our portfolio of projects and pretty much any other special initiatives that kind of come up along the way. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you, Diana. And Chad.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. And if you hear any yelling in the background, I have a 2.5-year-old and a 1-month-old, so a lot of noise at the Walker house. But I am currently the Senior Director of Marketing at Alignment Health. I focus mostly on member communications, where my job is to communicate from the plan to our members, things that can help with their care and care coordination, and also understanding their benefits and how to utilize the plan, and ultimately try to help retention and customer satisfaction. I see we got a well-rounded group of Kenan Flagler experience. I'm actually went to undergrad at Kenan Flagler and then got my master's at NC State in public administration. Worked in the nonprofit provider space for a while, and then switched over to government affairs and healthcare, and then now I'm in the payer space. So I've tried to touch the different avenues. Yeah, happy to be here and happy to be a part of the panel.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And it's really important for us to have such diversity of educational background, experiential background, and also roles within obviously one, segment of the healthcare industry, such as the payer space. So we just appreciate the fact that you all have these diverse backgrounds, and we'd love to gain your perspective from those backgrounds as we ask some questions. So you all already seem to have done a great job of explaining a little bit more deeply what your role is. But what I'd really like to start with is asking you, what steps, experiences, skill gaining did you take to land in your current career? And again, we can popcorn around.
All right, well, I'm happy to kick off. So I think in my current career, I use a kind of a combination of things I've used from previous jobs I've had before. I have sort of that deep industry experience in payer. I started working for payer clients as a consultant right out of undergrad. And so it's something that I've been doing for over 15 years now. So just kind of having a broad understanding of the industry landscape has been super helpful. And then also having strategy background has been really helpful in understanding how all the kind of dots connect. And so in my current role, I'm not deep in one function. I'm over several different functions. I'm over all the different markets. So kind of that ability to connect dots and have that like broader perspective at the company level. And I would say another key skill that I learned both in my business school classes, but also just from life, is negotiation and perspective taking. So much of what I do in my career is kind of, working cross silo. It's a large company. I have to work with lots of people on different teams that I don't have, direct supervisory responsibility for. And so the ability to kind of understand what other people are trying to get, what their concerns are, and what I'm trying to get, and sort of broker, work being done, has been probably the biggest skill that I've learned from my experience in through school.
I can go next. I would say, I had a bit of a non-traditional background going to MBA. I was a writer and an editor for a healthcare publication. So I think it started with getting a sense of kind of where within healthcare industry I wanted to go. And to me, the payer space, especially in kind of more Medicare Advantage, Medicaid managed care, is particularly interesting because the kind of resources, the kind of incentives line up really well for what generally is best for the company. For Humana, for the payer is also tends to be what's best for the member caregiver, and there's resources to do something about it. And the other thing is payers are not the way we thought of them 20 years ago. You all may know this or may not, but I know a lot of I remember even 2 years ago at Kenan Flagler, a lot of my peers kind of belatedly realizing that payers, yes, there's the kind of core utilization management, care management esque functions that we know, but payers also have pharmacy benefit managers and clinical pharmacies, and they own primary care practices, and they have teams working on digital strategy and all sorts of other things. So I think finding that piece of where I wanted to go, and I think some of the skills that Anna flagged are really helpful. strategy, I would encourage folks to do a STAR project, lead a STAR project. I think from a strategy development and storytelling perspective, that was one of the more valuable things I did at Keenan Flagler. I don't know if I wrote her name down. Isingguler still has an innovation strategy class, but that was a great one. And I think kind of that ability to work cross-functionally to develop those relationships and lead with curiosity enough to build those relationships and be able to communicate with and understand the perspectives and incentives and desires of different people across a company is really vital to kind of moving work forward. And I came in a different role. I came in a project management role with the idea that I'd work really closely with a business strategy team and hop over. And that's what happened, kind of built trust, build a relationship, and then kind of moved over into more of a strategic role. So even though I'm fairly new to Humana, have kind of navigated that internally a bit as well as I've gotten a little more started post my MBA career.
Terrific. And Chad?
Yeah. So how did I get here? I always joke with people that I stumbled into healthcare. After getting my master's in public administration, my focus was in nonprofit management. And at the time, I didn't realize so many healthcare, especially the providers, have a nonprofit status. So that kind of got me into the healthcare realm. It also allowed me to see different sides of the healthcare space. And kind of, how I got to where I am, I would say I always tried to be a sponge and soak up any opportunity I could, whether it was a project, internship, interviewing someone that I thought their job was interesting, joining local healthcare coalitions. So I just tried to always network and try to explore the greater healthcare space, any opportunity I could. And I think along the way, I kind of figured out what I liked and what I didn't like, and the pros and cons of different verticals. And so, I think that ultimately got me to where I am. And as Diana mentioned, I think the everyday skill I use the most is probably negotiation. I joke with people, I think I do more negotiation now than I did in government affairs, ironically. Because people are always prioritizing different projects, and you only have so much budget and so much time and opportunity. So you really got to figure out what everyone's needs are, and what's best for the member, what's best for the business, and kind of prioritize that work every day.
Terrific. And you just led us into our next question, which is, in essence, when you look at job descriptions, when you hear from other people just on the surface, like you go to a company presentation, you're like, oh, okay, that looks like a great job, a great role. But then you get into the role and all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, like every day I'm using these specific skills. I'm pulling in these specific experiences. Chad, you already mentioned negotiation. But what skills, abilities, and experiences do you really use regularly? And did any of those surprise you?
I would say one that I use a bit that kind of surprised me. So when I was in undergrad, my focus was in entrepreneurship. The reason why is I wish I had $1 million idea and I could have used that time and resources in Keenan Flagler to launch that. But I just thought it would be the most well-rounded experience. Like if I could start something from the ground up, then I would understand operations some, marketing some, a little bit of everything. And I use that a lot in my job now, whether it's starting a new initiative, if it's picking up an old initiative, if it's pivoting in a new direction. A lot of time in healthcare, there's always change. That's constant. And so I think having that ability and that entrepreneurial mindset and foundation helps a lot to kind of view change. Otherwise, it would be very stressed out because healthcare changes all the time.
Yeah. So I think one of the skills that I'm using a lot is probably communication skills and writing and storytelling, which is, unlike Josh, I'm not a writer. Like I said, I was a biology degree because I picked the major with the least amount of papers to write. So it's not, typically where I thought I would go, but in my current role, it's interesting. Most of what I do is trying to communicate and tell the story and kind of help people understand what we're trying to do. And that it's funny, I find that a lot of people can't clearly articulate what they're trying to do, and I end up rewriting either talking points or memos that go out. Even though we have an internal comms team that works directly with me and my boss, I still end up finessing, some of the language to make sure that it's really well understood. And so I talk a lot about communication for clarity, not for showing off what you know, but what is it that you really want them to take away from the message. So I think that's a skill that that has actually gotten better since school, probably. Yes, I think that communication and then the storytelling side, being able to really line up your, I'll say argument, but kind of say, like, what point are you trying to get across, and how do you have all the right supporting details to get it across and really make your point and either drive to a decision or some sort of understanding, whatever the meeting is for. But I find that is something that kind of, you might have all of the other hard skills, you might know your financials down cold, but if you aren't able to tell your story and really translate that into the so what, then you're not quite doing everything that you can in your job.
I think those are really good ones. I was going to say storytelling, definitely a big one. I think the add on negotiation that Chad and Anna that mentioned that I might say I think dovetails with that is just having practice and reps of structuring ambiguous problems, big and small. I think sometimes that, when you get into conversations on prioritization or how you make, various decisions from what kind of associate is going to lead certain outreach to, do we go do X, Y, and Z? I think sometimes I may have been skeptical of things like consulting frameworks because they felt very, squishy. But even just, coming up with what are the criteria that we're going to make to use this decision? How are we going to align on the way path forward and using that as a basis with other stakeholders to get alignment on that, gather input on that, and move that forward, I think is a key tool within a negotiation, and something that I don't think you need a consulting background in order to do. I think it's getting those reps and just being curious and a critical thinker of and kind of in moving that kind of thing forward. I think the other kind of foundational skill that I would say is really, really helpful is and this is kind of a kind of core value is around rethinking routine. Just not being afraid to say, why are we doing it this way? Why are we done it this way? And doing so with humility and with real curiosity, but with an eye towards, is there a better way to do things than the way we've always done it? I do think has been one, kind of a core, I don't know if you call it a skill or just kind of mindset, that has certainly helped me and as I've gone forward.
Terrific. Those were really wonderful skill sets. Again, too, hedging more toward those soft skill sets that we talk about so often. And the fact that there are so many places, not just classes. I mean, nowadays they have classes on storytelling and negotiation and so many of these topics, but there are also other ways, co-curriculars around the university where you can gain these, or even outside the university. So those were really fantastic, just examples for the crowd. So this is the time that we're going to let our audience go ahead and ask some questions. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask so far, not just about the moderator questions that we've started with, but any, again, along the lines of thinking about the payer space, please you can raise your digital hand. You can just unmute. If you raise your digital hand, at least you come into the screen so we can see that you're there. All right, Tim.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and speaking this late afternoon. Obviously, the healthcare system post-COVID is facing a lot of changes, and with that, the payer system. So I guess my question is, what are some things that you think are going to be challenging the payer space and potentially providing opportunity in the coming future? I know we're seeing a lot of changes with Medicare Advantage rates, medications like Ozempic. What's sort of the thing that keeps you up or excites you for the future?
So I'll start. This is kind of cliche and you hit on it a little bit. Cost of care is always the number one thing that we talk about, right? So, Ozempic this year and other drugs in that category. And, there's always kind of those RX costs, are going to continue to go up as kind of new things come down the pipe. So cost of care is something we're constantly tackling in new and different ways. One of the things you mentioned coming out of COVID, I think there was much more acceptance of people using, going virtual, telehealth. I know we've built entire, products around virtual first or virtual primary care. We're kind of starting to move into some of this virtual specialty type product design. So I think COVID was a good push into digital space and our digital roadmap and how we can get people to interact more digital, which helps us, excuse me, with like site of care redirection, which helps lower healthcare for all. So tying that back into cost of care. So
Yeah, along those lines, I think something that excites me is the overall movement, probably over the last decade, a lot to value-based care and looking at healthcare as a whole, whether that's telehealth, social determinants of health, all these things that we hear about all the time. But I think COVID, the silver lining, helped us, it pushed us there quicker to realizing some of those things, and that we have to look at the whole picture of health and healthcare and mental health and everything else. So that excites me because I think it's just an area where we can always get better with care coordination. I know care coordination is the buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but I think there's both tech that can help with that, whether it's AI or predictive modeling. And then I think there's what we call high tech, high touch. There's high touch options of like, how do we let our clinicians spend more time with what they're doing, with what they're good at? How do we communicate in a more simplified fashion so our members are hearing it and retaining it and educating caregivers and things like that? So I think that excites me because there's always room to improve there. And I think in the payer space, we see the value of that firsthand because we hold the bag and have to pay the claims. So there's incentive there. What scares me is a little bit what Diane mentioned is cost. It's just always going to continue to go up. How do we bend that cost curve? How do we, in a very fragmented space, how do we collaborate better together? Sometimes that scares me because I feel like we're not on the same page.
I know we've got a lot of questions, so I'll be brief. Would echo what other folks said. A couple kind of areas of real opportunity that excited about, but also tricky to navigate. One is payers increasingly seeing providers not as kind of an adversary, but as a partner, as we do value-based care, as we even do work on things like medication adherence and what have you, social needs and what have you. How do we effectively use our different levers, benefits, care management, utilization management, et cetera, to effectively see providers as partners in care, especially amid the move to value-based care. Two, Diana mentioned digital, and I think especially, Humana is mostly Medicare Advantage, kind of mostly seniors, and with some younger special need plan members. How do we increasingly move from kind of telephonic outreach to having more digital tools, text, email, portal, but like how quickly and how fast amid a senior population that's getting more comfortable with that, but is still not fully there. So that's another one. So I'll leave it there. But those are some of the things that I think are trickier issues to navigate, and exciting ones too.
Thank you.
Absolutely. A lot of excitement and very, as you mentioned, tricky issues, but very dynamic issues as well. So thank you. Jack.
Hey everyone. My question is for Diana. Specifically, how did you go through a UNC program as a Duke grad? I'm just kidding. That's probably pretty tricky for you. Probably got a lot of grief from classmates.
That's how good the program is. I was able to ignore all the logos and the basketball season and had good professors.
But in seriousness, I guess this question would be for you, although the others can answer it. I work at Humana with Josh, and our employer's gotten out of the commercial space. I'd be curious, as chief of staff on the commercial side, you probably are in a lot of interesting conversations. I'd be curious to think about how Elevance is thinking about the commercial strategy going forward, and maybe more broadly, how big players in the market are thinking about their strategy as more payers are exiting that space.
Yeah. So yes, for sure. We have regular meetings about capturing Humana membership now that you guys are exiting the commercial market. So thank you for that. So our commercial space, that's our oldest and most mature part of our business, but doesn't mean we can kind of sit back and stop innovating. We are lucky that I think I'll say most of our markets, we have the top market share. And so that's something that we're trying to hold on to, and everyone is always trying to gain market share from us. So, the biggest thing that we kind of have as the Blue Cross Blue Shield brand is our provider discounts. That's kind of our strategic advantage, as well as our brand. And so, all of our strategy is going to focus first and foremost on the strategic assets that we have and kind of build off of that. But we definitely look market level, sometimes even region, city level, kind of what is that competitive landscape? What do we think competitors, new ones coming in, what are they doing? Are they strategically trying to gain a foothold? What can we do to combat that? Product design is a big thing. A lot of people are doing very interesting things with products to try to combat cost of care, create affordability for members, either through network design, plan design, other innovative things, other kind of chronic condition management, those sorts of things. So always kind of keeping our head up and looking around, see what the competitors are doing.
Thank you.
Right, terrific. Emma Rose.
Hi, sorry, I'm driving, so I cannot be on camera, but I appreciate you all for coming. I have a specific question for Chad. So I have a government affairs background as well, and I chose to go back to school to kind of move away from the business of policy and more towards the business of health and the healthcare industry. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more on your experience transitioning from GR to business. Are there any transferable skills or anything you wish you knew before making that transition?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of transferable skills. A lot of those we mentioned today, whether it's negotiation, seeing both sides of an argument or a situation, or hypothetical. Policy, I think, yields where you can see things from a 30,000-foot view. And then there's also the ability to see things that are on line 4,000 of a bill that you have to, work out. So it's very detail driven too. So I think there's a lot of transferable skills from the government affairs space and policy space over to the payer and provider space. I think, especially in things like strategy, even market management, probably at the local level, because there's, competition, and you got to be very well rounded your skill set. So yes, there's a lot of transferable skills. I don't know if there's any I would go back to gain or build on. Oh, sorry, I was trying to remember the second half of your question. But yeah, I think just using the knowledge of anything you've gained from government affairs, and just you'll find different instances where you'll use different parts of it. There could be a policy change at CMS that you can read into and kind of be able to maybe be a little quicker to see how you need to pivot or change due to your background of how you know that's going to come down the pipeline. There's the storytelling aspect that you have to use in government affairs, whether you're speaking to different groups or different audiences, or even negotiating internally. So I think there's a lot of different skill sets that transfer over.
And maybe I'll just add on, because I'm working a lot with our government affairs team right now. We have a very proactive government affairs, government relations team that is always asking us like what we would want changed. And so they're coming up with like their lobbying agenda. So it's not just reactive to new legislation coming out or new mandates. It's also thinking through like what do we want that would kind of further our business goals. And so that team is trying to understand what we're trying to do from a business perspective and how they can sort of translate that into their day-to-day work as well.
Yeah, I'd even add that having conversations around what would certain kind of regulatory bodies need to see in order to shift, and are there ways that you can design certain tests of what we will do, smaller pilots, tests, et cetera, to think about moving the needle on in the regulatory space. So I think lots of intersections there.
Thank you all so much.
Terrific. Thanks for the question, Emma. And Jamie.
Thank you. So we saw uptake in value-based care, and it's been declining a little since COVID. I'm just curious where you all see the sector going in the next 5 or 10 years.
I'll give you two perspectives and I'll let the others jump in. So I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina up until 2021. And so Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina had a strong strategy towards value-based care. And so I was there kind of from the beginning of it and to actually seeing some of the results come in, and some of the results came in right after I left, but it showed huge improvements. It definitely showed a lot of savings. And so I think that is an example of a success story where you had leadership all aligned and just kind of the right relationships with the providers in the area and the ability to kind of really, get the hospital systems we needed at the time into the downside risk contracts. And we could really realize some of the savings. Now that I'm at Elevance Health, we definitely don't have as strong of a value-based care program. And at first I felt like, oh, we're behind North Carolina. This is an opportunity for us to continue to grow in, which is still true. But especially now that I'm in the commercial space, I see some of the complexities of it. You certainly need a lot of things to kind of line up. You need everyone's incentives to line up. You need your provider landscape in each market to you need to have those right relationships with them to be able to get them kind of have that negotiation power with them to get them into the right kind of downside risk relationships that you need. In the commercial space, when we talk about selling business, we always talk about what we can price. And it's very hard to demonstrate like hard savings and value-based care in year. So when we're trying to go out to a new big customer and say, here's all the cost of care programs we have, here's all the things that we're doing for you to get the pricing that we want, it's very difficult to show the right return within the year that you're trying to sell them of value-based care. So I still think there's some work to do there. I still very much believe in it, and it definitely can show savings, but it's just a kind of a longer walk, especially in the commercial space.
Just want to speak on behalf of the alignment. We focus in Medicare Advantage, and that's really our sole focus is in that space. And I definitely see where value-based care will always have, that model will always have play in the Medicare Advantage space. I think the fact that Medicare Advantage is only growing in the senior space and becoming more popular, even across administrations. And with CMS, I think the fact that we're saving money and we're being innovative with benefit designs, and whether that's supplemental benefits or how it all plays in together, and the product design, ultimately at the end of the day, CMS wants us to bend the cost curve while holding value for members and member satisfaction. And I think, by that being the stance of our industry and why it was created, they give us flexibility to play in the sandbox to, see what we can do and be innovative to constantly drive value.
Yeah, I echo Chad. As another payer kind of with an MA focus, value-based care is pretty core to our strategy. And, you know, I think those kind of seeing providers more as partners in the work is, I think, a key component of that. And I think we've, you know, seen, you know, there's been better outcomes when the incentives line up. So I think we'll continue to march on that path. I think, you know, there's, for all the reasons Anna mentioned, there's lots of complexities and different providers are at different stages, and you need a lot of kind of for things to enable it to work well. But I think it's been a buzzword for a while. I think is moving slower in some spaces than anyone would like. But I think from policy at the kind of White House and Senate and House level down to kind of the C-suites of payers, I think, and providers, I think you see a lot of alignment behind it, and that it'll continue down that path. It just won't be 100% linear, as Jamie, is your great question flagged.
Thank you.
Terrific. Again, so very different but similar answers, because you are all coming from different perspectives. So this is just fantastic to hear your responses. I'm going to pivot just a little bit to kind of move toward maybe some of the audience members thinking about interviewing or applying for internships or jobs in this space. Can you all tell the audience, what does your industry, company, or even folks in your role look for in a candidate?
So I think regardless of industry, role, or company, my best advice is you need to kind of own the problem, and you need to kind of run with whatever you have. I think that self-starter attitude, not just sitting back and waiting for someone to give you instructions, but being the one to kind of, ask questions. I forget, maybe it was Josh who said something about, like, you need to be questioning the process. Why are we doing things the way we are? Is there a way to do it better, to do it faster, to do more efficiently? I think that's always something that any role is going to look for. And I think another thing that was touched on is kind of structured problem solving. So anyone who can come in to a role, especially someone, like in a strategy type role, if you can come in and really define the problem, and I do love frameworks. I have a consulting background, but anyone who can kind of step back and say, what are we really trying to solve? Like, let's really make sure we all agree on the question. And then what are the specific questions that we need answered to be able to make a decision? That's how I like to think about things. And then that way you can start to use data and answer those questions, and everyone kind of agrees along the way. If we answer these questions, then we'll come out with this decision, and you get alignment the whole way through. So I think that's a key skill set. And then maybe my final piece is the healthcare industry is very complex when it comes to following the money. Unlike, a typical retail where you sell shirts and people either like them or they don't. Money comes from so many different places. There's government, there's the commercial business, there's pharmacy side, just understanding kind of the inflows and the outflows of money within the healthcare ecosystem. There's lots of people who work in healthcare their whole careers and don't fully understand it. So I think anytime you can educate yourself to kind of understand how we make money as a business, is always going to help you, make better decisions for your company.
I think those are great ones. I think some of them, the others touched on, executive communication, curiosity, et cetera. Other ones I maybe would add. I think, looking for folks that are mission driven. I think you can have all the right pieces, but kind of being able to communicate, your why for why you're interested in a role, why you're interested in working in a particular company, what it is about the opportunity and the company that kind of aligns with your interests and your values. Good opportunity to both show that passion, that drive, that curiosity, but et cetera. So I think that can be particularly helpful. And I think to kind of dovetail what Anne said, the kind of ability to speak to times that you've thought about data informed decision making, and that can be data from a variety of different sources. But being able to lead some of that forward, I think, is kind of valuable.
Yeah, definitely echo getting stuff done and knowing your value and what you bring to the team. I think the other piece for me is, the culture fit in the healthcare space. There's a lot of different, even among, payers, we're all very different and in different markets and different size and different teams. And so I would say the flip of that is during the interview process, you should be interviewing the company just as hard as they're interviewing you, and figuring out how you're going to be supported and what does the team look like, what is the timeline dynamic, expectations, work-life balance, all those mission driven, all those things like I said. That's usually where I see the biggest rub is just there's not a good fit, and you can never blame someone for either leaving or staying, because fit at the end of the day is what makes it happen.
Terrific. These are great answers. And I'd like to extend that just a little bit, especially for maybe folks that might be pivoting into the industry that don't have a healthcare background or haven't worked in that space before. What exactly are just a couple of examples? Because some of the things that were brought up, again, it's something like a self-starter or even showing structured problem solving or kind of a good culture fit. What are ways that people can show those? Because you can't necessarily do all of those things unless you have a specific interview format. How can people show those? And also, do individuals need a deep healthcare experience, or what can they do to kind of bridge that gap if they do not? That's kind of two questions in one.
Yeah, so I've interviewed people. In my old role, I ran like an internal consulting company for Elevance Health, and I worked on the strategy team. And I would interview people who didn't necessarily have a healthcare background. Maybe they were coming out of an MBA program or came from a consulting firm, but had different industry experience. And I would always ask, what are the top three, topics or top three issues in our industry, across any of our industry that, we should be thinking about. And the reason I would ask that question is I don't care if you don't have any healthcare background, you can read, something online. Like if you're interested in moving into healthcare, then you should do some sort of cursory research about the industry and be able to name things like Ozempic or value-based care or population health, behavioral health, any of those kinds of things. Like I don't need you to be an expert in them. I need you to know kind of, I'm really just testing to see if you're interested enough in committing to learning the new industry. That you've done some research and you can kind of speak to some things. We can teach you other things once you get inside the company, but I'm looking for someone who has the drive and the desire to learn. And so I think even if you don't get asked that question specifically, if you can, maybe work into one of your answers something about like, you read something or you saw something about a competitor, or maybe when it's your turn to ask questions, you can kind of bring up something like, hey, I've read this. Can you tell me how it's affecting your company specifically? Something to kind of signal that you have done your research, I think can go a long way.
Totally agree with all that. And I would just say before even a pivot or shift, I would say do your due diligence and your homework before you make the move. Because a lot of times people just want to do a full pivot when actually be digging deeper to what you're trying to look for. It might just be a little shift, or it might be, and to do that, I think interviewing, colleagues that might be in the area that you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in strategy, you want to move to communications, or you're in marketing and you want to go to product or design or something like that. I just think anytime you want to pivot or move, really figure out why or what attracts you to that area. Because maybe that's only 10% of that whole area, and then 90% is stuff that you can't stand. So I would just say do your homework and due diligence before you pivot or shift. And yeah, and then once you decide that, to Diane's point, I think really knowing your value of what you bring and being honest about what you don't bring, but always having the ability to be coached or learn. I think that's always valuable.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think some of those kind of informational interviews and kind of using the network, et cetera, can be super helpful and valuable, and in forming those relationships, gaining, Chad's earlier point about interviewing the company, just getting more information to help make sure it's a good, it's a path you want to go down. Thinking, understanding some of the things that are top of mind for folks you may be talking with. Et cetera. So I, definitely agree. Totally good to pivot your skill set, and it depends, there's different levels of pivot, right? Like your skill sets right now are likely very valuable for payers. There's a lot of aspects of the payer landscape, and the more that digging will really be helpful. Maybe one tactical idea. I think in terms of, source of information, definitely some good news sources out there. Politico Pulse, Fierce Healthcare, Modern Healthcare. I'm sure there's some other good ones. I do also think that payers that are that have investors typically have kind of investor day presentations that are on their websites, and I think in terms of getting a good sense of payer strategy and competitor strategies, those can be a super helpful resource to just get, at a glance. Usually there's a PowerPoint and they're recorded and things like that, and and there's typically some quarterly call with investors. Like that is kind of a gold mine of kind of how different companies are thinking about and presenting their strategies. So I think that's a good source of information as well.
Terrific. That is fantastic advice. And before we move on, I'm just going to put it back to the audience. Any questions now that we're kind of moving toward like career development, that arena?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
Oh, great. I'm sorry I missed the first half, so I apologize if this was touched on. My background's in MD MBA, so I have kind of the clinical side, and I was wondering, there's obviously a very evident gap between business and healthcare, and I'm just curious from y'all's perspective, like what role as a future clinician that we can play in helping to bridge that gap.
You play a huge role in bridging that gap. I work with clinicians every day, and a lot of my work is trying to find, the middle ground, especially in member communications of, the clinical operations and goals that we're trying to achieve, alongside with the marketing aspect of how we know the audience will digest the information and, best practices and things like that. So, I'm constantly working with our clinical operations team to pick their brain on, how do we communicate with members, or how do we frame a very difficult, conversation or topic. I used to work in hospice. So like, how do we, describe what hospice is without scaring people or causing anxiety? To very complex things. There's some things that are just not fun. I recently did a colorectal cancer screening where people literally had to take stool samples and send them back in, which is super not exciting. But I was trying to work with our clinical team to see, what worked in other areas or what worked in conversations that they're having a daily basis with their patients and their panel of like what is relatable or what is, so I think the more cross-functional your role, the more important that clinical perspective will come into play with that business perspective. I think that's extremely valuable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add on. I work with our clinical team a lot as well, a lot in designing programs. I touched a little bit earlier on chronic care management. That's a huge thing for us. Again, that's one where we should all win, if we're able to manage chronic diseases better. I work with clinicians on value-based care. That's something, as we move away from kind of that traditional kind of model where we're just telling providers what they can and can't do, which I know that no physician likes. Moving more towards value-based care, how do we design those programs to be something that is not too burdensome for our providers, but also is able to, increase outcomes. Also within health equity and SDOH and quality, those are three teams that I know are all heavily physicians on those teams, all thinking through how do we tackle these big issues and kind of design programs that help our members there too.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I'm sorry I can't turn my video on. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear everyone's perspectives because I think everyone has a really different take on how we bridge that gap. And so it's helpful to hear that. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Great. Thanks for the question. And I'm going to move on because I'd like to know, with all the experiences that you have had, both educationally and maybe in other careers or other job roles, are there any experiences that you wish you would have taken advantage of that you didn't? And again, too, this can be in your educational background and or in, maybe some of the early career jobs that you had.
Yeah, I would say, kind of staying on the topic that we just got off of, if I knew I was going to get into healthcare, I wish I would have gotten more background in either public health or healthcare administration. So I think anytime you can have, I think Josh mentioned he has a dual degree that's cross-functional because you're going to use that. Even if it's not a dual program, but just an opportunity to see the perspective from the other side and gain experience there, I would highly recommend that. And there's some opportunities I wish I would have taken in those lanes. Now I think that we're getting better in our education, especially, even for instance, like this Center for Business of Healthcare. Like I wish we had that back when I was an undergrad. I would have been all over it. Just ways that we can have schools that collaborate, whether it's the business school and the medical school or the public health school. I think that cross-functional learning is just super valuable.
Yeah, so I was going to school when COVID hit, and so everything kind of shut down. We went back behind our computers for my second year of my MBA program, but I wish that I had built even more connections, network more within my class. I had kind of my core group that first year, and the second year I was really looking forward to getting to know more people and having more of those group projects, which of course we did virtually. But building your, I'll call it kind of like a personal advisory, panel for yourself. It can be super valuable as you continue to rise up in your career because you will take on additional responsibilities, additional duties, and somebody who you thought, they're in an industry that we're never really going to cross paths, or they do some function that is just so far away from what I do that they're not worth, kind of investing in the relationship. Can be a huge mistake because as your career changes, as their career changes, it's great to have, those relationships in that network. And I feel like I got maybe a little bit cheated on that just because of COVID. It was a little harder to, have that space outside of the virtual class to do that. But also just, I think, perspective looking back, like I probably should have tried a little bit harder and taken more advantage of other networking opportunities available to me when I was in school.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. It's interesting. I mean, the cultures of the public health Gilling School of Public Health and Keenan Flagler are very different. And I think I learned a lot from navigating that. So I would encourage folks to, if there's an ability to take classes over in Gilling School of Public Health, there are kind of other areas at UNC, would definitely encourage folks to take that in. And I definitely agree. I think that building out, I think when I first got to UNC, the idea of like networking was, and you're all MBA or adjacent to, so I think you've heard this, the value of networking and whatnot a million and two times. But I think I was a little scared by it, but as you see it as just building relationships and learning about what other folks do and them learning about you and kind of whether it's your classmates or with others in industry, I think the more you can do that, the more you can build out your, advisors, your folks that you stay in touch with, the better for sure.
Terrific. And again, too, I think, everybody had some really great advice there. I am going to pop into the chat, and if you are a UNC student, we have the Interprofessional Education and Practice group that it's called IPEP across campus, and there you can actually work on interprofessional teams while you're here at the the university. We work with IPEP as well with the Center for the Business of Health, but I think, as Chad mentioned, Center for the Business of Health is a great place as well. I'm also going to pop in our events because we have some events such as our case competition, which is coming up, that you can also work interdisciplinary teams and really gain that perspective. And that's kind of the beauty we feel of many of the opportunities we have. Just like these panels, it's not just MBA students. We want students from across campus and even people from beyond. So great advice to students. And so I'm going to end, and I think that Chad may have touched on this one already, and then we had also some folks in the chat, but what are some favorite books, online publications that you find valuable to your work or just your personal growth? Some folks have even mentioned books that aren't even healthcare related, but if everybody could just mention maybe one or two resources that our audience can take away and do a little bit deeper dive, or something that could enhance them as a professional, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I have kind of three areas here. One, I'm a terrible reader of books. I always wish I read more books, especially when this question gets asked. But I think I'm an inch deep and a mile wide, where one domain is I always like to know what's going on in my community. So whether that's a listserv of things in the community, I have two little ones, things that we can go out and do, and events. In the professional world, Becker's, a lot of their stuff, they have different listservs like for payers and marketing and CEO reports and perspectives. Is probably my top one there. There's also Marketing Brew and Healthcare Brew, if there's any Morning Brew fans out there, which is another listserv. And then the other domain is just things that interest me. Usually that's on YouTube. Listening to Matt Brown talk about how we're going to win the football game this coming up week, or things like that. I'm a big sports fan, and so those are kind of my three areas. They're all digital and all of this shows, I think, which is probably where my attention span fits.
All right, I'll offer some books. So I have kind of a long commute in the mornings. I've moved down to Atlanta since starting at Elevance Health, and so I have to battle Atlanta traffic whenever I go into the office. So I'm an avid Audible listener. I listen to books on my commute. So these are not necessarily business books, but they're focused, either on soft skills or more kind of personal work-life balance. The first one I'll share is called Burnout. It's one that I found during COVID when I was stressed out a lot. And it's by two sisters, Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And it's about kind of exploring literally the physiological changes that happen in your body when you are at such a high stress level for too long that you experience that feeling of burnout and what to do about it. And it really helped me rethink some things, and actually was one of the reasons that I decided to change companies. I think that's a good one. Another one is called The Charisma Myth, and it is by Olivia Fox Cabane, and it is someone who studies people who are recognized as charismatic and what specifically are they doing and how you can apply those principles to yourself. So it's helpful in business when you're trying to form relationships to take on some of these traits to be more charismatic and form better relationships. And then the third one is called Happier Hour. It's by Cassie Holmes, and it is about how to structure your life with whatever time you have, how to fill it with what is going to make you happiest. And again, it's very kind of evidence-based, someone who does research on this and talks about different strategies and tactics you could use.
Terrific, thank you. And Josh, you're going to take us out because it is 7 o'clock, so we need to hear from you.
I'll take us home very briefly. On top of the ones I mentioned earlier, one, anything by Atul Gawande, articles or books. Being Mortal is on I think is his latest book on end-of-life care, which is, I think, a really good example of both the promises and pitfalls of our healthcare system to do better for members and their families. And I'll name one podcast. I think it's only on Apple Podcasts. I don't think it's on Spotify yet, last time I checked, but it's been a minute since I checked. A Healthy Dose is a podcast by two folks in the healthcare venture capital VC space. And they've interviewed a ton of like really interesting people across the industry, and always find that one an interesting listen.
Terrific. And again, we're a minute after our time, but thank you to our panelists. We just appreciate your time and your support of UNC and the Center for the Business of Health. And of course, our audience members taking the time to really dive in and gather the knowledge that you can from people in the real field. And tonight it was payers. So again, thank you all. Everybody have a great evening, and we hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.